Engulfed in the appearance of the elements, the living being gets wrapped up in doubt and forgets himself. In his confusion, he asks, "Who am I?" One should find out, who am I? Upon looking into and analysing what one takes oneself to be, the investigation clearly reveals that there is nothing that can be called I. When one investigates, what is this I? I am that, is the answer, and one sees only the self. How can any separate I exist there? A sign of self-surrender is to first find out, who am I? And with that comes the recognition of the attributeless self. When the visible objects disappear, what remains is only the self. With careful inquiry, one can see that visible appearances do not really exist. When the delusion of being an individual is discarded, reality is realized in one's self-experience.
Yeah, the impossibility of thinking or imagining yourself. As long as you're thinking you're something, anything whatsoever, as long as you can put a word, an idea, a thought, an image to yourself, that's not who you are. You're viewing everything from that perspective, as opposed to the perspective of what all of that arises in, awareness. It's like you're viewing it from downstream. You're viewing yourself as a subset of what you are. But what we are is impossible to describe. And that's a good thing, because it doesn't fit within our way of talking, our way of thinking, or any of these limited ways of engaging with life. Anything limited or that can be thought about in any way isn't essentially what you are. It's an expression of what you are, not separate from what you are, but it's not the truth of who you are in and of yourself. The essence, you could say. You take yourself to be the stuff that's in the cinema reel, the stuff on the screen, but you're not. You're the projector light that is filtered through this mind of cinema reel. It's like confusing a raindrop with the ocean, it's not the whole picture. It's a very zoomed in, tiny little zoomed in microscopic view of what you actually are. And what this is about is a perspective change. All that is needed is to remove the wrong idea or the false idea.
You're listening to the Nonduality podcast. This is Nic Higham from nisargayoga.com, and here with me is Paul Dobson. So, how do you remove false ideas? Well, you see them as such. As soon as you see that an idea, a thought, a concept is false, is untrue, then at once it's removed, it dissolves. So the practice is to see it, to recognize it as false. There doesn't need to be some kind of convoluted method. You see it as false. All ideas are false. So right there, that realization creates so much clarity. It's like, oh, all ideas are false. So I'm going into this inquiry to recognize that the truth of life, to recognize the ultimate truth, to wake up to what I truly am. And anything thought says, anything in the realm of concept is by definition not true. So if you can think it, it's not true. If you can conceive it, it's not true. It's false. So you don't reach a final conclusion on that level, because any conclusion would be untrue. You are either set on recognizing the true, the real, or you're content with a distorted version of that. So don't be half-hearted, as Nisargadatta says. Be earnest. Inquiry isn't about finding what is true on that level of thought. Inquiry is meant to put you into a state of openness and receptivity, this spacious, deep knowing It's not about having a full grip of exactly what's going on, exactly who you are, but knowing yourself truly beyond any conclusion. You know, like with what you could call the original inquiry, Ramana's "Who am I?" You put the question out there and stay focused on that question. Again, earnestly, don't let it drop. Just stay focused on that question. You respond to any thought that may arise by asking again, who knows these thoughts? When you have a sense of I, then you ask, from where has this I arisen? And you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. You don't stop until you exhaust the mind, until there's this cessation of thinking, of conceptualizing. No thought can capture that answer. The answer is being it. So the answer to the question, who am I, is being, is I am. And it isn't a thought. I mean, it can be turned into thoughts. You can say I am. But when it's truly recognized that I am that I am, and that is the answer, then there's no need to turn it into thought. There's no need to put it into words. You just are. And we can call that being. We can call that true knowledge, jnana, gnosis, the felt sense of presence, which is not intellectual, not at all, because that felt sense does not have any kind of a label or definition attached to it. That's always secondary. There's the recognition of what you are already, what you already are. And that is the wordless I am, the wordless I am. Right now, if you tune into what is felt, you will feel this palpable warmth of being. And though the mind will say, oh, it's the body's warmth. You know, it originates from wherever. But just discard those thoughts and feel that beingness. And that is the answer to the question, who am I? And you will find that it's not limited to the body. It's not that you experience any external objects or things, appearances. You only experience that one being. And it is the answer to that question, who am I? But it isn't anything the mind can conceive or attempt to put into any kind of conceptualization.
It's so easy to answer from thought. The mind can only work on a level that it can comprehend. It has to come up with something it can understand, that it can comprehend. Otherwise it's confused and like, no, I have to come up with something. That's too much. Infinity is too much for the mind. And that's why you'll never find the answer you're looking for in the mind. Because the mind can't contain infinity. It's made of infinity, but it can't contain infinity. I've got to have a reference point. I've got to have some reference point of what I am. And what you are can't be found, literally cannot be found in any element of ideas or, objects of any kind, very subtle thoughts or concepts, images. No matter how subtle it is, it's not the actual answer. It's a replacement. It's an imposter, an imposter posing. So something that's worth playing around with, I think, is see what isn't a thought. Immediately the mind will jump in as, oh, it's blah, blah, blah. It's this, it's God, it's awareness, it's whatever. It's me, or I don't understand, or, there's always an answer from the mind. And it's not that. Any thought whatsoever, it's not that. Just keep going. Let them stream by. There's no answer. You're not meant to answer it. That you just rest as what you are, because all this is doing is revealing the case that is already there. It's revealing what already is the case. What's timeless cannot be thought about because it requires time to think. Thought can only take place in time, whereas what you are is completely outside of it. It's timeless. You know, it gives rise to time. It gives rise to thought. It's what empowers everything, but it transcends all of it as well. And so that's a very different perspective. It's like that inquiry Colette said in, I think it's the last episode, you know, try and think of this moment. Try and think of now. You can't do it. You can't do it. It's always based in time. Thought is a time-based thing. And that's really only where any problem seems to arise is in these time-based thoughts.
I have a quote here by Nisargadatta. He says, Sadhana, the discipline, is only this, the knowledge which is dwelling in this body. I am. You must be one with it. You must abide in that only. You have to think, I am not the body, but I am that formless, nameless knowledge indwelling in this body. This I am. When you abide sufficiently long in this state, whatever doubts you may have, that knowledge, I am, itself will sprout out with life and meaning, and everything will become clear. No external knowledge will be necessary. A yoni knows. That is why he becomes free. The yoni knows the origin of that consciousness. Whatever has come upon this original state is time-bound, but the original state is timeless and spaceless, and that is one whole, a wholeness. So whatever is secondary, whatever has come upon this original state is time-bound. The unreal is always going to be transient. Anything that comes and goes, anything that is time-bound, anything put on this original state is not real. That is not your answer in this inquiry. Again, if you can conceive it, it's not what you are, it's not the answer. So keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Undercut the mind, pull the rug out from its feet, just keep going. It will keep giving you suggestions. You don't have to listen to them. Just look beyond. Those time-bound thoughts do not point to the real. Do not encapsulate the real. Nothing can. Thoughts are like notifications on your phone or your computer. These notifications are time-bound. Click me, click me, click me. They're suggestions. You don't have to click them.
Yeah, I like that analogy. The mind has got that feel to it, hasn't it? And this isn't about making enemies with the mind either, of course, but it's got that feel to it. It is kind of funny where it is, you know, it's almost like these annoying ad pop-ups. It's like a pop-up, you know, it just appears, hey, click me. And then some of them are so big, you can't see anything else. Some of the pop-ups cover the screen. You forget what was actually on the screen in the first place. It just covers the whole thing. And it's relentless. It's relentless with it. And all you need to do with pop-ups, actually, is to ignore them. You don't need to try and click all the X's and try and get rid of them. You just ignore them. Because what you are is the screen that the pop-ups are appearing on. You don't need to do anything to get rid of the pop-ups. You just see the truth of what you are. When you actually see the truth of who and what you are, that you're actually free of thoughts in every way, that you don't need thoughts, you're not reliant on thoughts. What you are actually doesn't really, it doesn't function in that mode. It doesn't need it. It doesn't, thoughts are kind of like this weird subset mode, but what you are inherently doesn't need thoughts. It doesn't need to think about itself. Once you see that, it's kind of like, oh, right, yeah, thoughts are appearing. Great. It can even be funny. I just invite anyone to watch the thoughts because it can be quite amusing. As long as you don't take yourself to be the thoughts, they're amusing. They're kind of like, it's almost like dark comedy or something. It's just like ridiculous. It's like they'll create their own suffering. And then the suffering's believed in. You can be, so say you're sitting on the beach in the most perfect weather and you've got like, a nice cold refreshment of choice, maybe a beer or wine or whatever it is that you like. In the middle of that, your mind will come up in this perfect situation. you'll be like, oh, I'm chilled. This is great. I can't think of anything wrong, actually. That moment, a thought will come up and it'll ruin your day. And it's nonsense. It's, it doesn't need to be listened to. It doesn't need to be paid attention to.
Yeah, it's like a word, a thought, an idea, a concept, a belief can in no way encapsulate truth. The thought is relatively true, but not ultimately truth. They can't encapsulate the fullness of truth. Thoughts are made of reality, but thoughts cannot encapsulate reality. Similarly, an ice cube can't encapsulate all the water in the world. It just can't. Thoughts, there may as well be sounds. There may as well be this voice speaking. And what is sound but energy? You don't have to get rid of anything. You don't have to melt down the ice cube, so to speak. You don't have to get rid of thoughts, melt them down. Because once you realize that there's only one non-substance, there's only one water, there's only reality. And how can anything be made of anything other than reality? How can, whether that's a thought or an apparent object, how can it be anything but that? How can it be? They're all just expressions of reality, just as the ice cube is an expression of water. So why put so much effort in and feel so frustrated and trying to do something with what's present? It will automatically dissolve. Just remember the nature of what's present, that every transient shape of reality has a place. Because look, you are holding, like awareness, whatever awareness is, it's just a word. Awareness, what you are, is holding this present formation, this present creation. The work is done. It's all held. And everything held is made of what you are. So don't tie yourself up in knots, trying to melt down the ice cubes of the mind.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. They are kind of like blocks of ice, aren't they, thoughts? They've got this sort of, even though they're ethereal, they kind of got this heavy density to them, like sort of weightedness to them. They're kind of unwilling, they're sort of stubborn and unwilling to move in some ways. So yeah, it's quite a good metaphor for them. And of course, they're made of the water that is everything. Reality is an ultimate relaxation, naturally. It's an effortless power, reality. It's effortlessly what it is. And it's not like it's lacking energy there either. It's just totally relaxed, yet totally effortless. The energy is effortless. It's like just pure power. It's like the sun doesn't have to work to churn out its light. It just is by nature of what it is. It's just radiant, and we are radiance itself, So in that place, it's very obvious that there's only relaxation. So any efforting it always seems paradoxical if you take it from a mind's perspective, but any efforting is kind of like working against that and creating because reality's perfectly balanced. It's like it has to counterbalance itself. Any efforting is kind of has to push back. It has to push back against itself. So any efforting pushes back resistance. And then so you hear that and you go, right, I'm going to relax then, which is a subtler form of efforting, actually. The best case scenario is if you go to relax and then you forget about relaxing and then you just end up relaxed. Actually, trying to relax isn't being relaxed, but you might by chance end up relaxed. It's like you may start the night in some halfway trying to sleep, but you end up asleep. It's like you end up asleep. That's kind of like the situation is we are just total relaxation. But the effort to relax is always mind-based. It's always effortful, even if it seems otherwise. So it's this, because that's what we are, because that's actually what we are. It's not an idea. It's not like something to get to, this state of relaxation. It's what we are. Anything that's efforting and struggling, it can't be true. It can't be in line with the truth of that. It's working against that in some ways. It's swimming against the current in some ways. The current of reality is effortlessly flowing powerfully. And we're saying, oh, I have to relax. And we're just, by doing that, we're actually trying to swim against the current. All you've got to do is see that you are the current. You've already been taken along by it, and you are it. You are effortlessly being taken along the flow of the current. And the good news is, even if you try and swim against it, you'll never beat it, because the current is so strong. The current of reality is so strong. These thoughts don't have any actual power to them, so they can't swim against the current of reality. They can only do it for so long until they exhaust themselves and get swept along, and hopefully drown. But so that's kind of how things are. It's you are relaxation, and seeing that the body relaxes, everything else relaxes in that seeing. It integrates itself into itself effortlessly, because that's what's true. What's true is relaxation. If the body's tense, then maybe it's not, it's not seen. There's a part of you that hasn't seen the truth of that. It's very, very subtle. Yeah, there's no way of thinking your way into it. So, I'll go back to the sun analogy. There's no way of thinking your way into being the sun if you're the sun, because that's already what you are. So any thinking that you're the sun or trying to be the sun is obviously a bit of a joke, isn't it? Because you're already the sun. You don't need to think, I need to shine now. You just shine. So we've actually created kind of a weird situation where we have cut ourselves off, not actually, but seemingly, from what we are, by creating the idea that we need to get back to what we are and that we're cut off from it. All of the ideas that we need to do anything at all.
Yeah, they're based on this idea that you're not already what you are, which is the original joke, isn't it? The original cosmic joke. It
is the joke.
You are not already what you are.
And I watched this deeply. I've watched this, and there's almost always, until you really fully are resting, there's always a subtle sense that I need to do something to make this happen. I need to make this happen in some way, some manipulation, some way, some very subtle sense that right now isn't it. So I've got to just do something in time to make this happen. And you're going away from it again. Like, it's just so subtle. I just, anyone listening, I'd kind of just have a play with this. Just really be very sensitive to any subtle sense whatsoever that it's not here. What you are isn't present now. What everything you could possibly need is here now. It be subtle to any sense that you need to do something to make something happen in any way. Because it doesn't always start as an obvious thought. It starts as a subtle energy, I find, that is kind of like a slight, this moment isn't it? This moment isn't it? And then it builds and goes, no, I need to do this and this and this, and then we'll come back to this. It's like, it starts though, see if you can catch it right at the beginning where it goes, no, this isn't quite enough. No, this isn't it. This isn't it. Because that's actually pushing the very thing you are, the very ecstasy of your being is pushing it away. It's like telling it, you yourself in all of your power as reality is telling yourself that you're not there, and because in its pure innocence and unconditional love for itself, it will respond and say, oh, okay, I'm not here then. And it's just untrue. But you create a sort of pseudo reality where you need to get somewhere.
Well, going back to Ramana, he says, because the ego is no entity, it will automatically vanish and reality will shine forth by itself. This is the direct method. The quest, who am I, is the axe with which to cut off the ego. So because the ego is no entity, it will automatically vanish. The false cannot persist because the false is always time bound. But what you are is permanent, and you are the permanent life that gives life to all that is transient and impermanent. So any false representation of yourself, any pseudo self, any spurious entity is only that, and therefore will dissolve when you tune into the existing relaxation. It's worth saying that we're not saying just simply relax the body. We're saying, and I liked the phrase you used last time we spoke, this full spectrum relaxation. Relaxation in every way, including the relaxation of the conceptual grip of the so-called mind. So when you start to tune into that depth of stillness, the depth of peace, the depth of spaciousness, then anything on the surface, any temporary patterning on the surface of the oceanic self that you are, well, it's seen to be only that, seen to be only equal to the essence of the depths, and can continue to ripple in its different patterns and various forms. That's okay, because you know it for what it is, and also it takes on a different light because you see its true light, and that is the disillusion of the patterning. And it all becomes very paradoxical because, I say, those patterns that make up this apparent you can continue, the patterns of your apparent life can continue, but you know them for what they are. Yeah, but they have a certain, all those patterns, they're not dense anymore. They're not heavy anymore. They're light and ethereal. So that is the disillusion. And they may become so transparent, so light, that they vanish altogether. But don't fixate on that. Don't fixate on one day, all my problems, all this false stuff that I'm caught up in will be no more, will vanish if I do a certain practice or listen to a certain teaching and really take it to heart and embody it. Don't fixate on that. It's really not helpful. It's really not helpful. Really not helpful. That's, that is the opposite of relaxation. That is like the seeking and the searching and the restlessness and the tension. So we're saying, tune into what already is. Just notice what already is, the nature of this present moment, that it's all held and released naturally, and that whatever is held and released is only equal to the holding itself in essence, not in form, but in essence. And that's really the message of today's episode. So, because the ego is no entity, it will automatically vanish and reality will shine forth. Reality can't not shine forth, and that is what is recognized. All is the shining forth of reality.
Because you literally are the life giver to everything. Once you see what these thoughts and patterns actually are, these patterns of, the sense of the small self, quote unquote. Once you see what that actually is, and you're no longer nourishing it and giving it life because it's no longer believed in as something or taken seriously, when it's seen as like a cartoon character that won't shut up, then there's no life there. There's no, it completely demands for its life resistance. It demands desire. It demands, you getting involved in it and entangled in it, and that gives it so much life because you are literally the life-giving force. You're not the thoughts. You're not what they're saying. You are the life-giving force. And so if you're not taking them seriously, they vanish just like everything else. What you are is literally the power source that gives rise to all of it. And it doesn't need to think about itself. It doesn't need to think about itself to know what it is. It just is. It can be compared to the sun in some ways. It just shines and it just is in all of its power. It doesn't need to think, I am the sun every moment. It just is. There's just a knowing as opposed to a thinking there. It just knows. Thought is in time. What you are is timeless. It just is. And it's shining.
When you remove those false ideas, when you drop those false ideas, there's a sort of, you could call it like a softening of the intellect or a slowing down of the mind. When you drop those obscuring ideas, when you see beyond them, the obvious shines through. You are left with this I am thatness, this living answer, this living realization, this non-conceptual knowing that I am. The true knowingness of your genuine nature is inherent in what you are.
It's too simple for words, literally, but also incredibly frustrating to hear stuff like that because it doesn't seem simple. Any effort to get to it is always from the position of the mental process, the thinker, the one that wants to get that, because you can't get what you already are. It's a fucking frustrating game that we play because you can't get what you already are, but you don't seem to be it, and it's like all of this stuff's going on. But and you hear people say all you need to do is just see what you are because that's already the case. It's like, from the mental process perspective, that's the most frustrating thing to hear in the world, because well, I'm not there. I need to do meditating and yoga and seeking, and maybe through those acts, you might get rid of a few of the clouds that seem to be clouding the sun, and it will become obvious. Oh, I was always the sun. That's kind of what can happen from that. But it's incredibly slippery. Don't allow yourself to create another identity within the mind which says, I'm it. Here I am. I'm it. Because you hear stuff and you go, even if it's extreme non-duality, the Neo-Advaita stuff, you then claim another identity that says they're no one. Oh, I'm no one. This is coming from nothing. And that's another identity. That's another thought, actually. So it's a very slippery slope, but it isn't impossible because it is already what you are. So that's the main advantage. Again, I do want to clarify, like, it does sound like separated things, thoughts, self, who you are, like they're different things that can be found in space and time, and different things that can be found in different aspects of experience. It's all one flow. It's all one flow, but there's only, through the limitation of language, it's quite helpful to split it up in some ways to make what's not true clearer. It's all one flow. You are all of it. You are the river and all the kind of water droplets and everything, the currents and everything. But what you're not is what one of those thoughts says. A thought is an expression of what you are, but what it's saying isn't true. It's a new storyline. It's pointing off into a new storyline, into imagination land that doesn't exist. It's referencing something that doesn't exist, and it's pointing towards something that doesn't exist. So it's not that the thought itself isn't real. It's a real energy event. It's a real, it's a real shining of the light of the sun of reality, you could say. But what it's saying is just utterly untrue. It doesn't have any weight to it. It doesn't have any reality to it. What it's saying in itself, what it's made of, is the same thing that everything's made of, which is what you are. But what it's saying is just utterly untrue. It can't possibly capture what you are in any way. It's not that these thoughts and things are enemies of any kind. It's just that they're lying. It's that they're storytellers. What they're saying is fine if you don't believe in it, and just go, oh, it's a story. I'd choose not to listen to that. Just don't click the pop-up ads. That's all you need to do. You don't need to click them. They're fine. They're allowed to be there. It doesn't matter. They're not caused. Actually, as the same on a computer screen, they're not actually taking up any room. It's room within infinity that can't be displaced. It's an infinite screen that can't be displaced in any way. It just appears to take up room if you focus on it. If you don't, and just then they take up no space. That's how the nature of infinity. We tend to put all of our focus on the thoughts because we think the thoughts are who we are. We think the thoughts are what we are. That's the issue mainly. And then from that perspective, any thought that comes up is an identification of me, and therefore it needs 100% of my attention and to be taken seriously.
That's a really good point and a helpful theme to talk about, I think, this idea of getting sucked into the story, getting pulled back into the ego. If you are to get established in what you are, you recognize that you can't not be established in what you are. So you know that you are. How do you know that you are? Because you're experiencing, because you feel alive, because you have this visceral sense of being. And does that ever end? Does that ever go anywhere, really? Does that ever truly get lost? Even when attention goes elsewhere, even when you get distracted? Well, how can it? How can it really? You don't cultivate that beingness, you recognize it. That knowledge, that I amness. It's not a new thing, it's not a new state, it's remembered. So when you are established as that knowingly, then you also recognize that it can't be lost. And so anything on top of that, anything time bound, any secondary movement doesn't change anything. I get lost in my thoughts. I get distracted by the ego's habits, by the old conditioning. I get distracted and I feel stuck again. Who is that I? Who is that I that gets stuck? What's really going on there is that what you truly are, like the absolute reality that you are, is choosing to focus on a fragment within itself and a fragment made of itself. And we call that the story, we call that the ego, we call that the drama of being human. So that's you, not the individual, because there is no individual. That's you, life, attending to that transient expression. And as such, that can't be wrong. It's totally appropriate for that moment. See, then the pseudo-individual will come and say, well, but I want to know who I am all the time. I want to remember who I am all the time. But what is that? And I called it a pseudo-individual because it is a pseudo-individual. What it really is another experience. It's not an actual individual. It's an experience of an individual. I think Rupert Spira says this brilliantly. He says, and I'll just paraphrase, if you become aware of the page on which words are written or printed, and then you shift your focus to the words themselves, and then from the words to the story that they depict, do you really lose sight of the page? And it's the same. It's exactly the same. So you might have this kind of awakening experience of the page, so to speak, the page of I am, that you are. And what's happening there is I am is self-aware, and then chooses to read the words once again, and then maybe chooses to enjoy the story. So it's all unfolding perfectly. Nothing has gone wrong. Nothing has gone wrong. Because it's the page, becoming aware of it, the page, becoming aware of the words, following the words like those pop-ups or those notifications, seemingly getting lost, but never truly getting lost, because it's always established in itself as that page. It's always established in itself. That is, you are always established in yourself. You can't not be. So there's nothing to worry about there. Just trust have faith that the page that you are is always present. So then go ahead and read the words, follow the notifications. Don't try to install a pop-up blocker. Like, don't try to erase the words. Like, to find this existential eraser to rub it all out of, because that's the perfect state. Well, it's all the perfect state, even the words, even the stories. That's, as you were saying, that's an expression, a divine expression. Shakti, nothing else. You don't have to block anything or erase anything. Just know that all things are what you truly are.
It's a great metaphor, isn't it? It's so simple because everyone can relate to that. So you can see how this happens. You're taking in the words and the page simultaneously. They simultaneously exist. They're not two separate things. They're two modes of perceiving, but they're the page is there and then the words are there. It's a perfect analogy for this situation. You know, let's say you are the page. You know, you can choose to rest as the page, or you can choose to, like you say, go into the story. Why not? Enjoy the story. I mean, enjoy the soap opera of your life. I was sort of listening to Paul Hedderman the other day. He calls it "What's Happening." This is what's happening. And then we go into what's not happening. So I quite like that. The words on the page are what they're saying is what's not happening. They're actually part of a page. They're just in slightly different shade of the page. What they're saying, what they're pointing towards is what's not happening. What they're kind of insinuating is what's not happening. There's only actually what's happening. It's a very funny situation where all you've got is a page that's created a universe. This is what the mind does. It takes this one fact and creates a universe of stories, an infinity of stories in all directions. That it never really left itself. It never left that fact that it was always paper. That's our starting point and our end point. There's no start and end to it. That's what we are. You know, what you said earlier, it just is. And the mind can't get that. It just is, okay? What you are just is. Inexplicably, can't put it into words, you just are. And the mind's like, wait a minute, let me work this out. Can I do some equations to get to this? Maybe if I read enough books, I can get to this. Nope, you just are. That's just how it is. That's the starting point. I mean, you are switched on. What you are is switched on. Like, there's no off switch. You are. And it's so from there, you can only misidentify. All you can do is misidentify into thinking you're not that. It's no different to how you dream at night and identify yourself as whatever you identify yourself as in the dream. The storyline that goes on there, you might think you're a dragon or something. I've had dreams where I'm a dragon. I mean, I'm not a dragon, but I would truly, for that period of time, be flying around, hanging around with other dragons. There's be a storyline that makes sense. I mean, and you wake up and you go, well, that was nonsense. I never left my bed. You know, it never happened. It just didn't happen. Yet it's totally believed in. This is what consciousness does. There's only consciousness, what we can call consciousness or awareness. It just goes, it sees it all as a great adventure of curiosity and exploration of itself. Yeah, it's a very different perspective on what's happening.